It starts with fatigue and fever. Then stomach pain and vomiting. In a couple days, the distinctive rash or pox of smallpox appeared all over the body. If you had smallpox in 1776, there was a 1 in 5 chance you would not survive. Americans at Ticonderoga in 1776 fought for independence from smallpox. At the same time, they fought for independence against Great Britain. Smallpox was an old world disease which periodically arrived in fort cities like Boston from Europe, Asia, and Africa. To some, the fight against smallpox overshadowed the military struggle. John Adams thought, "The smallpox is 10 times worse than Britons, Canadians, and Indians together." Soldiers first started to notice the spread of smallpox in and around Quebec at the start of December 1775. Many cities in Massachusetts had outbreaks prior, including Newburyport, where Benedict Arnold's men passed through on their way to Quebec. Even before the disastrous attempted assault on the gates of the city, which claimed the life of General Richard Montgomery, the insidious spread of smallpox had begun. It was common knowledge that those who survived smallpox received lifelong immunity, and that an operation known as inoculation also provided immunity. To be inoculated, one had pus from an infected individual put into a small incision. An inoculated individual generally contracted a milder form of the disease, with a survival rate around 98%. During the 1721 Boston outbreak, Reverend Cotton Mather followed the advice of his enslaved servant he called Onesimus, who shared his experience of being inoculated as a child in West Africa. One Boston physician, Zabdiel Boylston, inoculated 287 patients, with only 6 deaths, and newspapers published these auspicious numbers widely. Though inoculation was the subject of great debate, its popularity grew, especially on the eve of the Revolution, with dedicated smallpox hospitals appearing across New York and New England. Despite evidence to the contrary, Americans saw inoculation as a uniquely American solution. American icons like Benjamin Franklin actively promoted inoculation, and nearly all the members of the Second Continental Congress had themselves inoculated before meeting together in Philadelphia. These wealthy gentlemen could afford the costly procedure and 3 weeks of medical care as they quarantined while they were contagious with this disease. Unsurprisingly, soldiers in the Northern Army began inoculating themselves against smallpox as the disease began to spread in Canada. In January and February, Benedict Arnold wrote to Washington of his efforts to stop the spread of the disease, isolating cases and preventing soldiers from inoculating themselves, which threatened to spread the disease and disable soldiers during the 3 weeks they had symptoms. But soldiers continued to inoculate themselves covertly, like Pennsylvania rifleman John Joseph Henry, who recalled soldiers getting the laceration under their fingernail to obscure their inoculation from view. Connecticut surgeon Louis Beebe continued to inoculate soldiers, considering this their right and its prohibition an illogical mistake. For his part, Washington issued an unequivocal order against any officer who pursued inoculation on May 26, 1776. With reinforcements rushed north from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the victorious army outside of Boston in the spring of 1776, smallpox spread rapidly among soldiers with no immunity. Major General John Thomas continued to prohibit inoculation, even though, as a Massachusetts doctor before the war, he was aware of its benefits. Having ordered a retreat from Quebec on May 5, 1776, Thomas consolidated this army at Sorel, only to be diagnosed with smallpox on May 19th. Benedict Arnold in Montreal had a change of heart, ordering soldiers to begin inoculating on May 16th, only to be countermanded by General Thomas. The Army's hospital evacuated Thomas to Chambly, where he died on June 2nd, succumbing like an estimated 1,000 to 1,500 soldiers within the Northern Army. Command fell to Brigadier General Sullivan, who led the retreat of the army up the Richelieu River and Lake Champlain. As he did so, the hospital preceded the army, keeping the sick soldiers away from the advancing British, but spreading the infection for those that followed. By the middle of June, as the Northern Army reached Ile-Noix, smallpox raged through the army. Dr. Beebe arrived in the afternoon of June 17th and noted the vast crowds of poor, distressed creatures. In his diary, he struggled to capture the full extent of the misery that surrounded him, with each tent having one or more in distress, and continually groaning and calling for relief, but in vain. As the army retreated up to Crown Point, they left the British at the north end of Lake Champlain, but the disease grew worse. The July 7, 1776 Council of War at Crown Point sought to address defending the northern approach into the American colonies and the threat of smallpox to the army. As Generals Sullivan, Arnold, de Woodke, Gates, and Schuyler decided between remaining at Crown Point and moving to Ticonderoga, they indirectly chose between two paths to defeat smallpox: quarantine versus inoculation. In moving to Ticonderoga, they chose quarantine, doubling down on this strategy to fight the disease. By preventing those who were sick from passing smallpox to others, one stopped the spread, while keeping uninfected soldiers fit for service. The decision of the Council of War followed this logic, setting up a general hospital at Fort George at the south end of Lake George, 32 miles from Ticonderoga. Existing smallpox cases immediately went there. As the Continental Army began to assemble on both sides of Lake Champlain on July 17th, General Horatio Gates ordered anyone seized with smallpox immediately removed to Fort George. At the same time, new recruits, including a large reinforcement from New England militias, could arrive via Lake Champlain or the road over the Green Mountains, keeping them separated from the disease and stopping its spread. This plan partially worked, and by the end of October, recovered soldiers from the General Hospital at Fort George rushed to join their comrades to meet the British at Ticonderoga. General Gates' victory, holding the line at Ticonderoga on October 28th, validated the decision of the July 7th Council of War. But the cost of this strategy was significant. Back on July 13, 1776, one woman per company from the Army's Pennsylvania regiments had to serve as nurses at the hospital, where the disease continued to claim victims. As General Gates tried to root out smallpox at Ticonderoga, he increasingly distrusted the sick. On August 19th, he ordered anyone sick with smallpox to swear an oath that they contracted the disease naturally rather than through inoculation. Perhaps the biggest price of this decision was that smallpox continued to be a problem within the camp at Ticonderoga, slowly abating into the fall, but never entirely absent. The continued fight against smallpox, which smoldered into the winter at Ticonderoga, undermined quarantine as the winning strategy.
Much as the cause changed from one of rebellion to independence, so too the leadership of the Continental Army began to embrace inoculation. Washington's Director General of Hospitals, Dr. John Morgan, published an impassioned pamphlet supporting inoculation. General Artemus Ward disregarded Washington's orders and followed suit, beginning the inoculation of Continental troops in eastern Massachusetts on July 17th. Despite the successful inoculation of Martha Washington in May, General Washington continued resisting the practice until he relented on February 6, 1777, ordering the wholesale and systematic inoculation of the Continental Army, directly addressing this second front in our ongoing war for independence.